Two homeless twin sisters find a wallet full of money belonging to the new millionaire president. But instead of spending the money, they only ask for medicine as a reward. When he discovers who those medicines are for, he begins to cry. Night fell over the city like a cold blanket, bringing with it a silence broken only by the occasional distant roar of engines and the whisper of the wind between buildings. Under the awning of an abandoned store, three figures huddled together, seeking shelter from the merciless cold that seeped through their tattered clothes. Emma and Olivia, two 4-year-old girls identical as droplets of water, pressed themselves against the trembling body of their grandmother, Sarah. Their once shiny golden curls, now tangled and dull, framed pale faces marked by an innocence that painfully contrasted with the harshness of their situation. Sarah, a 68-year-old woman whose weary eyes held stories of a lifetime, struggled against a persistent cough that shook her frail body. Her skin, once soft and well cared for during her years as a domestic worker in private homes, was now rough and weathered by time and the elements. "Grandma," Emma whispered, the more talkative of the twins, "you're shaking a lot." Her big blue eyes, full of worry, focused on Sarah's wrinkled face with a maturity beyond her years. Olivia, always quieter and more observant, adjusted the thin blanket they shared, trying to better cover her grandmother's bony shoulders. The worn, patched fabric could barely protect them from the biting wind that slipped through the gaps in the awning. Sarah forced a smile, trying to mask the pain and discomfort she felt. "I'm all right, my angels," she replied in a hoarse voice, interrupted by another bout of coughing. "Soon it will be morning, and the sun will warm us." The girls exchanged worried glances. Even at such a young age, they understood their grandmother's condition was worsening every day. The fever consuming her seemed more intense that night, and the cold sweat breaking out on her forehead contrasted with the trembling that shook her body. Emma, always the bravest, stood up determined. "I'm going to look for more cardboard, Grandma." "To make our castle walls thicker," Sarah tried to protest, but another coughing fit stopped her. Olivia silently followed her sister, both aware they needed to do something to help the only family they had. The twins ventured into the shadows of the deserted street, their small bodies shivering in the early morning cold. Their eyes, accustomed to the darkness, scanned corners and alleys in search of any piece of cardboard or newspaper that could offer a little more insulation against the cold. As the girls moved away, Sarah fought against the memories that haunted her. She remembered the days she worked in the Andersons' mansion, caring for a bright-eyed little boy named James. How drastically life had changed. How had she, who once cared so tenderly for someone else's child, ended up barely able to protect her own granddaughters? Fever made her delirious, mixing past and present. For a moment, she thought she saw little James running down the mansion's hallway, laughing and calling for her. But the illusion vanished quickly, replaced by the harsh reality of her current situation. Emma and Olivia returned minutes later, carrying pieces of cardboard found near an electronics store. Their faces, though tired, glowed with a sense of accomplishment. "Look, Grandma," Emma exclaimed, showing off her find. "Now we can make our castle stronger." Olivia silently began positioning the pieces of cardboard around them, creating a makeshift barrier against the wind. Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Her granddaughters, so young, were already demonstrating a strength and resilience she feared they would need to survive in this cruel world. "You are my little warriors," Sarah murmured, pulling them close as soon as they finished setting up the shelter. "So brave, so strong." The girls snuggled up again beside their grandmother, the only blanket now reinforced by the additional cardboard protection. The silence of the night was broken by the distant sound of sirens, causing all three to instinctively shrink back. "Grandma," Olivia said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "tell us again the story of Prince James." Sarah smiled despite her pain. The story of Prince James was the girl's favorite, a tale she had created based on the little boy she had cared for so many years ago. It was a story of kindness, courage, and hope, all she wished for her granddaughters. "Once upon a time," Sarah began, her voice weak but determined, "there was a prince named James. He lived in a great castle, but his heart was bigger than any palace." As Sarah narrated, The twins snuggled closer, their eyes shining with the magic of the story. For a few precious moments, the cold, hunger and fear were forgotten, replaced by the warmth of love and the light of hope. Night wore on, and the stars above seemed to twinkle in solidarity with the three figures under the awning. Emma and Olivia finally fell asleep, their soft breathing in contrast to Sarah's persistent cough. Sarah stayed awake, keeping watch over her precious granddaughters. Her body ached, fever burned, but her spirit remained unshaken. Looking at the sleeping faces of Emma and Olivia, she made a silent promise. Somehow, some way, she would find a way to give them the life they deserved. The first morning light began to tinge the sky a pale blue when Sarah finally gave in to exhausted sleep. The three figures, grandmother and granddaughters, now slept huddled under the thin blanket, protected by cardboard walls and the love that united them. At that moment, under the awning of an abandoned store, amidst the harshness of street life, rested three angels. Angels who were tired, hungry and cold, but angels nonetheless. Angels who, without knowing it, were about to change not just their own lives, but the lives of many others, with a simple act of honesty and courage. And so, as the city slowly awoke to another day, Emma, Olivia and Sarah slept, unaware of the extraordinary destiny that awaited them, all beginning with a lost wallet and a gesture of kindness that would echo far beyond that cold sidewalk. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The city woke up gradually, the midnight silence giving way to the distant hum of traffic and the first signs of life on the streets. Under the battered awning that served as shelter, Emma opened her eyes, blinking against the gentle light that slipped through the cardboard gaps. Next to her, Olivia was still sound asleep, curled against Sarah's frail body. Emma watched her grandmother for a moment, noting with concern the drops of sweat on her forehead, despite the piercing morning cold. Sarah's cough had worsened during the night, echoing in the silence of the early hours. Emma knew they needed to reinforce the walls of their makeshift castle to protect her grandmother from the biting wind that was on its way. Careful not to wake Olivia or Sarah, Emma unwrapped herself from the shared blanket and slipped out of the shelter. The morning air made her shiver instantly, her thin t-shirt and worn-out pants offering little protection against the merciless cold. "Liv," Emma whispered, gently nudging her sister, "wake up. We have to find more cardboard before Grandma gets up." Olivia opened her eyes slowly, blinking sleepily. Without a word, she stood up, immediately understanding the urgency in her sister's voice. The two exchanged a look of mutual understanding, a silent language developed over their 4 years of shared life. Hand in hand, the twins set off on their mission, their small footsteps quiet on the empty sidewalk. The city was still mostly asleep, the streets deserted except for a few early workers and the occasional homeless person huddled in dark corners. "There," Olivia pointed, her voice almost inaudible. She indicated a pile of discarded boxes behind an electronics store not far from their shelter. The girls approached cautiously, always alert to any sudden movement or sound. Living on the streets, they had learned early that danger could appear anywhere, any time. Their big, watchful eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. As they rummaged through the boxes, separating out the driest and sturdiest ones, an unusual glimmer caught Emma's attention. Under a crumpled newspaper, partly hidden by the shadow of a nearby bench, lay a brown leather wallet. "Look, Liv," Emma whispered, pointing to the object. The twins exchanged looks, a blend of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. Slowly, as if afraid the wallet might disappear, they moved closer. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of excitement and fear causing her hands to tremble slightly. Emma was the first to touch it, her small fingers stroking the soft, noticeably expensive leather. "It's so nice," she murmured, carefully lifting the wallet as if it were a fragile treasure. Olivia glanced around nervously, her large eyes scanning the street for any sign of danger. "Should we open it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emma hesitated for a moment, recalling her grandmother's teaching about not taking things that didn't belong to them. Sarah's voice echoed in her mind. "Honesty, my dears, is the most precious thing we have," but their need and curiosity won out. With trembling fingers, she opened the golden clasp. The inside of the wallet was a trove of leather and nylon compartments, each containing something that made the girl's eyes widen in astonishment. In one pocket, a stack of high-value bills, more money than the twins had ever seen in their lives. In another, shiny credit cards and a gold official badge that gleamed under the dim morning light. "How much money do you think is in here?" Olivia asked, her eyes fixed on the bills, her voice a mixture of fascination and fear. Emma began counting, her lips moving silently as she added up the amounts. When she finished and her eyes were wide with shock. It's a lot, Liv. More than we can count." For a moment, the two were silent, contemplating the possibilities that this money represented. Hot meals every day, a real room to sleep in, medicine for Grandma, new, warm clothes, a life away from the cold and dangerous streets. "We could buy medicine for Grandma," Olivia whispered, giving voice to both their thoughts. "She would get better. We wouldn't have to worry anymore." Emma nodded slowly, but something bothered her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, always reminding them to do the right thing, no matter how difficult. "Honesty is what keeps us human," Sarah always said. "It's what sets us apart, what gives us dignity even when we have nothing." "But it's not ours," Emma finally said, her voice trembling. "Grandma always says we shouldn't take what doesn't belong to us." Olivia bit her lip, clearly torn between desperate need and what she knew was right. "But Grandma's so sick, Emma. And it's so cold. Maybe just a little, for the medicine." The twins stood there in the cold morning, the wallet weighing between them like a secret too heavy for their small shoulders. The wind blew, making them shiver in their thin clothes, cruelly reminding them of their dire situation. "Let's bring it to Grandma," Emma finally decided, her voice gaining strength. "She'll know what to do. She always does." Olivia nodded, a mixture of relief and disappointment in her young eyes. Together, they carefully placed the wallet in the ripped pocket of Emma's coat and started collecting the cardboard they had set aside. The walk back to their shelter seemed longer than ever, each step a conflict between the hope of a better life and the weight of the decision they would have to make. When they arrived, they found Sarah awake, sitting against the wall, her pale face marked by worry and fever. "Where were you?" she asked, and her voice hoarse from the night's cough. "I was so worried." Emma and Olivia looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. With trembling hands, Emma pulled the wallet from her pocket and held it out to her grandmother. "Grandma," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We found something." Sarah looked at the luxurious leather wallet, her eyes widening in surprise. With shaking fingers, she opened it, gasping at its contents. Her gaze swept over the documents, the money, and finally rested on the ID photo. Her hands began to tremble more intensely. "Oh, my God," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "What is it, Grandma?" Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. Sarah lifted her eyes from the wallet, looking at her granddaughters with a mixture of astonishment and apprehension. "Girls," she said slowly, "do you know whose wallet this is?" The twins shook their heads, both curious and a bit scared by their grandmother's reaction. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "This wallet," she began, "belongs to the president, James Anderson." The girl's eyes widened in recognition. "The man on TV?" Olivia asked, her voice full of awe. Sarah nodded, a sad smile flickering on her lips. "Yes, dear. The man we saw on that television in the store window, remember?" Memories flooded the twins' minds. A few weeks earlier, during one of their walks in search of food, they had stopped in front of an electronics store, drawn by the bright screens on display. Sarah had stood still, mesmerized by a live broadcast. On the screen, a man in a suit was giving a speech, his voice muffled by the glasses but his face clearly visible. "Look, my dears," Sarah had said that day, her voice choked with emotion. "That's the new president. May God bless him and help him take care of all of us." Now, sitting in their makeshift shelter, the girls looked at the wallet with a new sense of reverence and fear. "What are we going to do, Grandma?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. When she opened them again, there was a determination in her gaze the girls knew well, a strength not even illness and poverty had managed to extinguish. "We have to return it," she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. Olivia, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke, her voice small and hesitant. "But Grandma, there's so much money in there. We could buy you medicine, and food, and a warm place to stay." Sarah gently placed a finger on Olivia's lips, silencing her. Her eyes, though feverish, shone with an ancient wisdom. "I know, my love, I know how much we need it. I know how much you want to see me get better, but doing the right thing is more important than any amount of money." Emma, feeling tears forming in her eyes, asked, "But why, Grandma? He has so much, and we have so little." Sarah took both girls' hands in hers, ignoring the pain in her chest and the trembling of her limbs. "My dears," she began, her voice gaining strength, "honesty is our only true treasure. It's what keeps us dignified, what makes us human. When everything is taken from us, when we have nothing, we still have our integrity." She paused, coughing lightly before continuing. "This money could buy us food and medicine for a while, yes, but what would it buy for our souls? What lesson would I be teaching you if I allowed us to keep something that isn't ours?" The twins listened intently, their young faces serious and attentive. Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Also, think of the owner of this wallet. He must be worried, looking for it. By doing the right thing, we're not only keeping our integrity, but also helping someone who needs it." Emma and Olivia nodded slowly, a mixture of pride and understanding, gradually replacing the disappointment in their young faces. Sarah pulled them into a tight hug, ignoring the pain in her chest and the heat of her fever. "You are my little heroines," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "So honest, so brave. Never forget, our real wealth is here." She touched their hearts, and here, touching their foreheads. "No one can take that from you." As the sun rose in the sky, lighting their humble shelter, Sarah and her granddaughters prepared for a journey that would change their lives forever. With the president's wallet safely in their hands, they would face a world that had often been cruel to them, armed only with their honesty and courage. The treasure they had found was not the money in the wallet, but the strength of their character and the love they shared. And that, Sarah knew, was more valuable than any fortune they could imagine. "Now," Sarah said, standing up with difficulty, "let's return this treasure to its owner, together." And so, 3 figures, a sick grandmother and 2 small twins, left their makeshift shelter, walking hand in hand toward an uncertain future, but with the certainty they were doing the right thing. The wallet in their hands was heavy, but their hearts were light, filled with a wealth no money could buy. The day that was beginning promised to be one of the most important of their lives, a journey that would test their courage, honesty, and faith in human kindness. As they walked through the city streets, Sarah silently prayed that her decision not only returned the wallet to its rightful owner, but also brought a bit of hope and light to their lives, so marked by adversity. The morning sun was already high when Emma and Olivia arrived in front of the imposing government building. The 4-year-old twins paused for a moment, their small hands entwined, gazing in awe at the towering glass and steel structure. The contrast between the world they knew, the cold streets and their makeshift shelter, and this gleaming giant was almost overwhelming. "It's so big," Olivia whispered, her wide blue eyes filled with both admiration and fear. Emma squeezed her sister's hand, trying to convey a courage she barely felt. "Remember what Grandma said," she murmured. "We have to be brave. It's the right thing to do." The 2 girls looked at each other, their identical faces reflecting a mix of determination and apprehension. Their blonde hair, though tangled and dull, glistened under the morning sun. Their clothes, worn and a bit too large, silently told the story of their life on the streets. With a mutual nod, the twins began crossing the plaza in front of the building. Their small, hesitant steps echoed on the marble floor, sounding absurdly loud to their own ears. As they neared the entrance, they noticed the curious stares from people around them. Well-dressed executives hurried by, their leather briefcases swaying rhythmically. Some cast curious glances at the girls, but most didn't even notice them, as if they were invisible. One elegant woman pulled her purse closer as she passed them, a gesture not lost on the twins. Reaching the revolving door, Emma and Olivia hesitated. They had never seen anything like it. They watched for a few seconds as adults entered and exited with ease. Emma, always the braver one, decided to take the initiative. "Come on, Liv," she said, gently pulling her sister. "It's like a Ferris wheel, only sideways." The two stepped awkwardly into the rotating compartment, pushing with all their might. They went around a full turn before managing to exit on the other side, almost stumbling in the process. The lobby was even more impressive than the exterior. The polished marble floor reflected the bright overhead lights, causing the girls to blink repeatedly as their eyes adjusted. The hum of conversations and the click-clack of expensive shoes created an intimidating cacophony. Emma and Olivia timidly approached the reception desk, which seemed like a marble mountain before them. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, looked over her computer with a mildly irritated expression. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone clearly indicating she would rather not deal with two ragged children. Emma swallowed hard, gathering all her courage. "Please, Mum," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We found something important and need to return it." The receptionist sighed, looking around as if expecting to see a responsible adult. "Look, girls, this is a government building. It's no place for games. Where are your parents?" Olivia, usually shy, stepped forward. "Our grandma is sick. We came alone. It's really important." The receptionist's frustration was palpable. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. You need to leave now. This isn't a place for unaccompanied children." The twins exchanged desperate glances. They had promised Grandma they would return the wallet, and they couldn't fail. The wallet weighed in the torn pocket of Emma's coat, constantly reminding them of their mission. It was at that moment that Elizabeth, a senior secretary who had worked in the president's office for years, passed through the lobby. Her keen eyes caught sight of the unusual scene: two small children, clearly living in homelessness, being turned away by the receptionist. Driven by a compassionate curiosity, Elizabeth approached. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice calm yet authoritative. The receptionist seemed relieved. "Mrs. Miller, these children showed up with no supervision. I was just telling them to leave." Elizabeth looked at Emma and Olivia, noticing the desperation in their eyes. There was something in the determination of these tiny figures that intrigued her. "What brings you here today?" she asked the girls directly, ignoring the receptionist. Emma, seeing an opening, answered quickly, "We found something that belongs to someone important. We came to give it back." Elizabeth's curiosity grew. "And what would that be?" Olivia replied, her small voice clear. "A wallet, ma'am. There's a lot of money in it." The silence that followed was heavy. Elizabeth studied the faces of the two girls before her, looking for any sign of deceit. All she saw was honesty and hope. "I see," Elizabeth finally said. Turning to the receptionist, she spoke firmly. "I'll handle this. Please arrange some snacks and water for the girls." The receptionist hesitated, but Elizabeth's tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, she nodded and walked away to fulfill the request. Elizabeth guided Emma and Olivia to a quieter corner of the lobby where there were some comfortable sofas. The girls sat down, their small legs swinging without reaching the floor. "Now," Elizabeth said gently, sitting in front of them, "tell me exactly what happened." Emma began, her voice gaining confidence. "We were looking for cardboard this morning to make our castle walls stronger against the wind." Olivia continued, "We found the wallet near a bench. It had a lot of money inside." "Our grandma is really sick," Emma added, tears appearing in her eyes. "But when we saw who the wallet belonged to, she said we had to give it back. No matter how much we need it, we can't keep something that isn't ours." Elizabeth felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Here were two small children, clearly living in circumstances she could scarcely imagine, yet they chose to do the right thing. "You girls are very special," Elizabeth said, her voice choked with emotion. "Many people wouldn't have done what you did." Emma and Olivia smiled shyly, releasing some of the tension in their small bodies. "Grandma always says that honesty is our greatest treasure," Olivia whispered. Elizabeth nodded, deeply moved. "Your grandmother is a very wise woman. You must love her very much." The twins nodded in unison, their eyes shining with love and concern. "Now," Elizabeth went on, "I'm going to make some calls to find out exactly who this wallet belongs to. In the meantime, I want you girls to have something to eat. It must have been a long walk here." As if on cue, the receptionist returned with a tray containing sandwiches, fruit, and water. The girls looked at the food with wide eyes, suddenly aware of how hungry they were. "Go ahead and eat," Elizabeth encouraged gently. "I'll be right over there making some calls." While the twins ate hungrily, Elizabeth stepped a few paces away, taking out her phone. She dialed a number, her eyes never leaving Emma and Olivia. As she waited for the call to connect, Elizabeth reflected on this unexpected encounter. She had spent years working in this building, dealing with politicians, business people, and important figures. But it was these two little girls, in their worn-out clothes and huge hearts, who were teaching her a lesson in integrity and courage. The call was answered, and Elizabeth began to explain the situation, her gaze still fixed on Emma and Olivia. She knew this would not be just another ordinary day at work. It was the start of something bigger, something that could change lives, not only those of these two brave girls, but perhaps many others as well. While speaking on the phone, Elizabeth made a silent promise to herself. She would do everything in her power to help these children and their sick grandmother. Their honesty and bravery deserved nothing less. The presidential office was a world apart, as distant from the reality of the streets as the moon is from the earth. Lavish Persian rugs muffled footsteps, while silk curtains filtered the sunlight, creating an atmosphere of serene power. James Anderson, the newly inaugurated president, sat behind his imposing oak desk, immersed in a stack of documents demanding his immediate attention. The soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of papers were the only sounds breaking the silence. James sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He had only been in office for a few weeks, but the weight of responsibility already lay on his shoulders like a lead cloak. It was in that moment of contemplative quiet that a light knock on the door echoed through the room. James straightened up, expecting to see his assistant with more papers to sign or urgent issues to discuss. "Come in," he called, his voice carrying the authority of his position. To his surprise, it was Elizabeth, his senior secretary, who entered. She was known for her efficiency and discretion, rarely interrupting the president without an extremely important reason. What caught James's attention, however, was the expression on her face. The normally composed Elizabeth showed signs of unusual emotion, a mixture of concern and something James couldn't fully decipher. "Mr. President," she began, her voice carrying a restrained urgency, "there is something you need to see personally." James frowned, intrigued by the mysterious nature of the interruption. "What is it, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "Two little girls are here to see you, sir. They found your wallet." The president remained silent for a moment, processing the information. He had noticed his wallet was missing earlier that day, but with the constant hustle of his responsibilities, he hadn't had time to deal with it. The mention of children being involved, however, sparked his curiosity. "They could have just handed it in at reception," he commented, trying to understand why this seemingly trivial matter had reached his office. Elizabeth shook her head, a determined spark in her eyes. "Sir, I believe you'll want to handle this personally. Trust me." There was something in Elizabeth's voice, a rare, tangible emotion that captured James's attention. In all their years working together, he had rarely seen his secretary so moved by a situation. After a brief moment of reflection, he nodded. "All right, Elizabeth, bring them in." The following minutes felt interminable. James stood up, walking over to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. Outside, the world went on its frenetic course, unaware of the drama unfolding within those walls. Finally, the door opened again. James turned a four, and his gaze fell for the first time upon Emma and Olivia. The contrast between the two small figures and the luxurious setting of the office was shocking, almost surreal. The twins, in their worn clothes and pale faces, looked even smaller and more vulnerable under the bright lights and amid the symbols of power surrounding them. James felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he couldn't fully name. Rounding the desk, he approached the girls, crouching down to their level. His face, normally stern and reserved for cameras and official meetings, softened into a gentle smile. "Hello?" he said softly, his voice stripped of any presidential formality. "I hear you have something for me." Emma, visibly summoning all her courage, took a step forward. Her small, trembling hands held out the leather wallet. "It's yours, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with both fear and determination. "We found it, and Grandma said we had to return it." James took the wallet, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. A wave of emotion hit him as he realized the magnitude of what they had done. He opened it carefully, confirming that all its contents were intact: the documents, credit cards, and most impressively, all the money. The honesty of that act, coming from children who clearly had so little, left him momentarily speechless. "You've done something incredible today," he finally managed, his voice laden with sincerity that surprised even him. Something many people, even in much better situations, wouldn't have the courage to do. "May I ask your names?" "I'm Emma," said the girl who had handed over the wallet, her voice quivering. "And this is my sister, Olivia." Olivia, half hidden behind her sister, gave a timid wave, her big blue eyes observing James with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. James smiled at both of them, feeling a wave of tenderness that took him by surprise. "Emma and Olivia, beautiful names for very special girls. How old are you?" "4," they answered in unison, their small voices echoing in the vast office. The president felt his heart tighten. They were so young, so innocent, and yet they were already facing a world that had clearly not been kind to them. The courage and integrity they had shown in the face of circumstances that would make many adults crumble was truly remarkable. "Well, Emma and Olivia," he began, choosing his words carefully, "you've returned something very valuable to me. More than just a wallet with money and documents, you've given me a lesson in honesty and courage. I'd like to reward you for that. What would you like?" The twins exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. It was Olivia, the quieter of the two, who finally spoke, her small voice surprisingly clear. "Could you please give us medicine?" The question took James completely by surprise. Of all the things he might have expected to hear, toys, clothes, even money, medicine was the last thing on his mind. The simplicity and urgency of the request hit him hard, reminding him brutally of the reality these children faced. "Medicine?" he repeated, unable to hide the confusion in his voice. "Are you sick?" Emma shook her head, her eyes filling with a concern that seemed far beyond her years. "No, sir. It's for our grandma. She's really sick." James felt a lump form in his throat. He glanced at Elizabeth, who stood near the door, tears beginning to form in her eyes. The emotion of the situation was palpable, filling the air of the office with a nearly physical tension. "Can you tell me more about your grandmother?" he asked gently, sensing he was about to hear a story that would forever change his perspective. Words began to flow, with the twins taking turns as though they shared one voice. They spoke of their makeshift shelter under an abandoned store awning, of the cold that seeped through the cardboard at night, of Sarah's persistent cough and the fever that wouldn't relent. They described nights spent shivering, sharing a single thin blanket among the three of them, and days when hunger was a constant companion. "Sometimes she can't even stand up," Olivia said, her large eyes brimming with worry. "But she always tries to smile for us. She teaches us things," Emma added, a hint of pride in her voice. "Letters and numbers and stories." "She tells lots of stories, but she always takes care of us," Olivia continued. "Even when she's really sick, she says we're her greatest treasure." James listened, feeling a mixture of admiration and horror grow inside him. These children and their grandmother were living in conditions he could barely imagine, facing challenges that would break many adults. And yet, when confronted with a chance to improve their lives using the money in his wallet, they chose honesty. "You two are very brave," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And your grandmother must be an incredible woman." The twins smiled, a touch of pride shining in their tired eyes. It was clear that, despite all the difficulties, the love and respect they felt for their grandmother were unshakable. "What is your grandma's name?" James asked, seized by a sudden curiosity. Something about their story resonated deeply within him, as though he were on the verge of a great revelation. "Sarah," Emma replied, her face lighting up at the mention of the name. "Sarah Williams." The world around James seemed to freeze. Air left his lungs as if he had taken a punch, and for a moment he felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He stood abruptly, staggering a few steps back, his mind in turmoil. "Mr. President," Elizabeth called, concern clear in her voice. James barely heard her. His mind was flooded with long-buried memories, now resurfacing with overwhelming force. Sarah Williams. The name echoed in his head, bringing images of a kind smile and hands roughened by hard work. A woman who had been more than an employee in his childhood home. She had been a second mother, a source of love and guidance when he needed it most. "It can't be," he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible. The twins watched him with wide eyes, frightened by his sudden reaction. James forced himself to regain composure, aware of the fear he must be causing them. He turned his attention to them, struggling to keep his voice calm. "Your grandmother," he began, unable to stop his voice from shaking slightly. "Did she ever mention working for a family named Anderson?" Emma and Olivia exchanged confused looks before Emma replied, her voice filled with surprise. "Yes, sir. Sometimes she tells us stories about a boy named Jimmy she used to care for. She says he was like a son to her." Emma's words struck James like lightning. Tears began to form in his eyes, and he made no effort to hold them back. The realization of what was happening, the incredible coincidence, or perhaps fate, that had brought these girls to him was almost too much to bear. "Oh my God," he whispered, tears now rolling freely down his face. Elizabeth stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "James?" she asked softly, momentarily forgetting formalities. James turned to her, his eyes shining with a mix of pain and hope. "Elizabeth, it's her. Sarah. She took care of me when I was a child. She was like a second mother to me. I lost touch with her years ago. I thought I'd never see her again." He turned back to the twins, who watched him with a blend of confusion and concern. He crouched down once more, taking their small hands in his. "Emma, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmother, she was very important to me a long time ago. I thought I'd lost her forever. You have no idea what a gift you've given me today." The girls stared at him with wide eyes, starting to grasp the magnitude of this moment. "Are you Jimmy?" Olivia asked timidly, a spark of recognition in her gaze. James nodded, a trembling smile on his lips. "Yes, I am. Your grandmother used to call me that. I was just a boy when she cared for me, but she changed my life in ways I didn't realize until now." Emma, always the braver, took a step forward, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and plea. "Can you help Grandma? She's really sick." The question snapped James back to the reality of the situation. His dear Sarah, his beloved Sarah, was sick and homeless. Guilt washed over him, mixed with fierce determination. How could he have allowed this to happen? How had he lost contact with someone so important? He stood, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. His posture changed, the man giving way to the president, but his eyes retained a softness rarely seen in public. "Elizabeth," he called, his voice now firm and decisive. "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day. Call an ambulance and my personal physician, and prepare a guest room in the official residence." Turning to the twins, he smiled, a smile full of promise and hope. "We're going to get your grandmother right now. I'll make sure she receives the best care possible. And you two, you won't have to worry about a place to sleep or something to eat anymore." Emma and Olivia looked at each other, a mix of relief and disbelief crossing their young faces. "Really?" The afternoon sun was already beginning to fade when the presidential motorcade arrived in the neighborhood Emma and Olivia had indicated. The contrast between the luxurious cars and the worn-down streets was stark, drawing curious and wary looks from the few passers-by. James Anderson, President of the United States, felt his heart race as they neared the spot. The twins, seated beside him in the limousine's back seat, alternated between excitement at being in such a fancy car and concern for their grandmother's condition. "It's over there, Mr. President," Emma said, pointing to a corner where a tattered awning jutted over the sidewalk. The car stopped, and before security could open the door, James was already stepping out with the girls right behind him. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the mound of cardboard and old blankets forming a makeshift shelter. "Grandma," Olivia called, her small voice trembling with anxiety. For a moment there was only silence. Then a weak movement among the blankets and a low groan made James freeze. "Sarah," he called, his voice barely a whisper. Slowly, a figure emerged from the blankets. Sarah Williams, once a strong and vibrant woman, now looked like a shadow of her former self. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes sunken and fever-bright. She blinked several times, as if not believing what she saw. "Jimmy," she murmured, her voice hoarse and faint. "Is that really you, my boy?" James felt tears welling in his eyes again. In an instant, he was no longer the president, but the little boy Sarah had raised with such love. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Yes, Sarah, it's me," he answered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm here." Sarah tried to sit up but was overcome by a coughing fit that shook her frail body. James held her gently, feeling the heat of her fever through her thin clothes. "Oh, Jimmy," she managed between ragged breaths, "you've grown so much. Am I, boy? Such an important man now?" Emma and Olivia approached timidly, their small faces full of worry. "Grandma," Emma began, "we brought help. The president is going to take care of you." Sarah looked at the twins, a weak smile lighting her tired face. "My little heroines," she murmured. "You've always been so brave." James watched the interaction, his heart breaking over Sarah's condition. How could this have happened? How had he allowed the woman who had raised him to end up on the streets? "Sarah," he said softly, "we're taking you to the hospital. You need medical care." She shook her head weakly. "No, Jimmy, I can't leave the girls. They need me." "We'll take care of them," James assured her. "I promise you, but right now you need to take care of yourself." At that moment, sirens signaled the arrival of the ambulance. Paramedics quickly approached, assessing the situation. "Mr. President," one of them addressed James, "we need to transport her immediately. She has a high fever and shows signs of severe pneumonia." James nodded, feeling a knot in his stomach. He turned to Sarah, who now seemed to drift in and out of consciousness. "Sarah," he called gently, "we're taking you to the hospital now. The girls will be safe, I promise." Sarah opened her eyes, her unfocused gaze settling on James. "Jimmy," she murmured, "forgive me. I should have told you, should have explained." "Shh," James soothed her. "There's nothing to forgive. Rest now. We'll talk when you're better." As the paramedics prepared Sarah for transport, James turned to Emma and Olivia. The twins clung to him, their small bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. "It's all right," he assured them, kneeling to their level. "Your grandma will get the best care possible, and you're coming with me. I'll look after you until she's better." Emma, always the spokeswoman, asked in a trembling voice, "Do you promise you won't separate us?" James felt his heart clench. "I promise," he said solemnly. "You'll stay together. Nothing will separate you." The trip to the hospital was tense, with James splitting his attention between Sarah, who was only half conscious in the ambulance, and the twins, who clung to him in the following limousine. At the hospital, a team of doctors was already waiting for Sarah. James watched helplessly as she was rushed into the emergency area. The twins clung to him, their small bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. The next few hours were a blur of anxious waiting and whispered conversations with doctors. James made countless calls, mobilizing resources and people to ensure Sarah received the best possible treatment. Finally, late in the night, the head doctor approached James with an update on Sarah's condition. The pneumonia was severe, complicated by malnutrition and prolonged exposure to harsh conditions. The next 48 hours would be critical. James spent the following days torn between his presidential responsibilities and long hours at the hospital. Emma and Olivia were temporarily housed in a secure suite under the care of a trustworthy team, but James made sure to visit them daily, keeping his promise not to separate them. It was on the afternoon of the third day that Sarah finally woke up. truly lucid for the first time since her admission. James was at her side when she opened her eyes, her gaze immediately focusing on him. "Jimmy," she said, her voice still weak but clear. "You're really here." James took her hand, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I'm here, Sarah, and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah smiled faintly, then her expression clouded with worry. "The girls, Emma and Olivia, they're safe," James quickly reassured her. "I'm taking care of them, just like I promised. They're dying to see you." Sarah visibly relaxed, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was a determination in her gaze that James recognized from his childhood. "Jimmy," she began, "there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." James felt his heart race. "What is it, Sarah? You can tell me anything." Sarah took a deep breath, as though gathering courage. "It's about the night I left, the night that changed everything." James leaned closer, his mind drifting back to that night so many years ago when he was only 12. The night Sarah, the woman who had raised him since he was a baby, disappeared without explanation. "I was working late that night," Sarah began, her voice low but steady. "Everyone thought I'd already gone home, but I was finishing up a few things in the kitchen. That's when I heard voices coming from your father's office." James listened intently, sensing that he was about to uncover a truth long buried. "It was your father, Robert, and your mother, Margaret. They were arguing about money, large sums of money." Sarah paused, tears forming in her eyes. "Jimmy, your father was embezzling millions from the company. And your mother, she knew everything." James felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. His parents, whom he had always seen as models of integrity, involved in a massive embezzlement scheme. "I didn't want to listen," Sarah continued, "but I couldn't help it. The more I heard, the worse it got. They talked about offshore accounts, about bribes, about how no one would ever find out. But someone did," James said softly. "You did." Sarah nodded sadly. "That was my mistake. I dropped something, made a noise. They heard me. Margaret found me in the kitchen. She realized immediately that I'd heard everything." Tears now flowed freely down Sarah's face. "She accused me of spying, of trying to blackmail the family. She said she'd call the police on me if I didn't vanish immediately, that no one would believe a housekeeper over their word." James felt a growing anger inside him, but forced himself to remain calm. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help?" Sarah looked at him with such love and sadness that James felt his heart break. "Oh, Jimmy, you were just a boy, a brilliant boy with dreams of changing the world. How could I destroy your family, your trust? How could I risk your future?" "So you chose to leave," James concluded, realization finally dawning. Sarah nodded. "It was the hardest decision I ever made. Leaving you, it was like ripping out a piece of my heart. But I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was preserving your future." James was silent for a long moment, processing everything he'd just heard. His mind spun with the implications, not only for his personal past, but also for his political career, built in part on his family's legacy. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice trembling slightly, "you sacrificed everything for me." Sarah smiled sadly. "You were like a son to me, Jimmy. You still are." "I would do it all over again if I had to." James felt tears spill down his cheeks. He leaned in and gently hugged Sarah, mindful of the tubes and monitors around her. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything you went through. But now I'm going to fix it. I'll take care of you and the girls. And I'll find out the whole truth, no matter the consequences." Sarah squeezed his hand weakly. "Be careful, Jimmy. The truth can be dangerous." James pulled back, wiping his tears. A new determination lit his eyes. "The truth is necessary, Sarah. For you, for me, for the country. And I will find it, no matter the cost." As Sarah drifted into an exhausted sleep, James remained by her side, his mind racing. The day that began with a lost wallet had turned into the catalyst for a revelation threatening to shake the foundations of his life and his presidency. But one thing was certain: He would not rest until justice was done. For Sarah, for Emma and Olivia, and for all those who, like them, had been victims of a system favoring the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. The road ahead would be difficult, but James Anderson, the boy Sarah had raised to be fair and courageous, was ready to face it. The truth, however painful, would be revealed. And with it, perhaps, would come the chance for a new beginning, not just for his reunited family, but for the entire nation. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the still somewhat labored breathing of Sarah. James sat beside the bed, his mind still processing the bombshell revelations he had just heard. Sarah, for her part, seemed lighter, as though a secret long guarded had finally been lifted from her shoulders. "Sarah," James began softly, I don't even know where to start. All these years," Sarah smiled sadly. "I know, Jimmy. It's a lot to take in, but there's more you need to know about what happened after I left." James nodded, bracing himself emotionally. "Please tell me everything." Sarah drew a deep breath, mustering her strength. "When I left the mansion that night, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a few dollars in my pocket. I couldn't go back for my things, afraid Margaret would follow through on her threat." She paused, her gaze distant, recalling those difficult moments. "The first few weeks were the hardest. I slept in shelters, did odd jobs here and there. I couldn't use my previous references, fearing your family would find me." James felt a wave of guilt wash over him. While he grew up in comfort and privilege, Sarah had been struggling to survive. "Eventually," she continued, "I got a job as a cleaner at a cheap hotel. The pay was miserable, but at least I had a roof over my head. That's where I met John." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "John was a good man, a janitor at the same hotel. We fell in love, got married. For a while, it seemed things were looking up. You started a family," James said gently. Sarah nodded. "We had a daughter, Mary. Oh, Jimmy, she was so beautiful. She had your eyes, you know. Sometimes when I looked at her, I remembered you as a little boy." Tears began forming in Sarah's eyes. "But life has a cruel way of surprising us. John died in a work accident when Mary was just 2. Suddenly, I was a widow with a small child to raise." James held Sarah's hand, offering silent comfort as she carried on. "I did the best I could, worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Mary grew up to be a wonderful girl, strong and determined. She married young, had the twins. Emma and Olivia were the light of our lives." Sarah paused, her expression turning somber. "Then, 2 years ago, Mary and her husband were killed in a car accident. The twins, by some miracle, survived. Suddenly, at 66, I was responsible for 2 little children again." James felt his heart clench. "Oh, Sarah, I tried. Jimmy, I tried so hard. But jobs were scarce for someone my age. The bills piled up. The apartment we shared with Mary and her husband, we couldn't keep it." Sarah let out a sob. "Before I realized it, we were on the streets." Tears were now running freely down Sarah's face, and James couldn't hold back his own. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. "The streets are harsh, Jimmy, especially for small children. I did my best to protect them, keep them fed and warm, but every day was a battle." Sarah looked straight into James's eyes. "You know what kept me going? Remembering you, thinking of the little boy I had raised, imagining the man you'd become." James felt as though his heart was being crushed. "Sarah, I should have looked for you. I should have done more." Sarah shook her head. "No, Jimmy, you didn't know. How could you? I vanished from your life without a word. But know this, in all those years, through every hardship, I never stopped loving you like a son." James couldn't hold back any longer. He leaned in and gently hugged Sarah, tears wetting her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I'm sorry for everything you went through." Sarah stroked James's back, just as she had when he was a child. "Shh, it's all right now. We're together again. That's what matters." When James finally pulled away, his eyes were red, but a new determination shone there. "Sarah, I promise you, I'll fix this. I'll take care of you and the girls, and I'll uncover the whole truth about what my parents did." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of pride and concern. Be careful, Jimmy. Your parents, they're powerful. And the truth may have repercussions far beyond our little family. James nodded gravely. I know, but I can't ignore it. As president, I have a duty to seek truth and justice, and as the man you raised, I have a moral obligation to do what's right. Sarah smiled, a smile filled with pride and love. You've grown into the man I always knew you'd be, Jimmy. Strong, fair, and brave. James held Sarah's hand, his mind already racing with what he had to do next. I'll start a discreet investigation. We need to find out the extent of the embezzlement and who else was involved. And, Sarah, we need to ensure your safety and that of the girls. Sarah nodded, exhaustion beginning to overtake her once more. I trust you, Jimmy. I always have. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, James remained by her side, his mind in turmoil. The revelations of this day had shaken the foundations of his world, his privileged childhood, his family's political rise, his own presidency, all now viewed in a troubling new light. James knew the days ahead would be hard, investigating his own parents, exposing a corruption scheme that likely stretched far beyond his family, dealing with the political and personal fallout, all would be the greatest challenge of his life. But looking at Sarah, at the face of the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect him, James understood he had no choice. He would face that storm, whatever the cost. For Sarah, for Emma and Olivia, and for all who, like them, had been victims of a system that favored the powerful. Rising silently, James cast one last glance at Sarah before leaving the room. He had work to do, a discreet investigation to launch, security measures to put in place, and a painful truth to confront. The road ahead would be difficult, but James Anderson was ready to walk it. With the strength Sarah had taught him and the integrity she had nurtured in him, he would face the consequences of so many years of silence. And perhaps, in doing so, he could begin to mend not only his reunited family, but also the country he had sworn to serve. As he walked the hospital corridors, James made a silent promise to himself and to Sarah. He would uncover the truth no matter how painful. And in the end, he would seek justice for Sarah, for his family, and for all those who had been silenced for too long. The day that began with a lost wallet had become the catalyst for a change that would echo for generations. And James Anderson, the boy Sarah had raised to be fair and courageous, was ready to lead that change, no matter the personal or political cost. The Oval Office was tense with silence. James Anderson, President of the United States, stood behind his desk, his gaze fixed on the door. Beside him, Sarah Williams sat in a comfortable chair, her hands clasped in her lap, a mix of nervousness and determination in her eyes. The sound of approaching footsteps made James square his shoulders. The door opened, and Elizabeth, his secretary, announced, "Mr. President, your parents have arrived." James nodded. "Please, let them in." Margaret and Robert Anderson entered the room, their faces revealing confusion and concern. Upon seeing Sarah, they both stopped abruptly, shock clear in their expressions. "James, what's going on?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why is Sarah here?" James took a deep breath, struggling to control the storm of emotions within him. "Mother, Father, please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Reluctantly, Margaret and Robert sat, their eyes darting between James and Sarah. "Before we begin," James said firmly, "I want you to know this conversation is being recorded. Whatever is said here will have legal consequences." Robert paled. "James, son, what is this about?" James looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Sarah," he said gently, "could you please tell them what you told me about the night you left?" Sarah took a deep breath and began recounting the events of that fateful night so many years ago. She spoke of overhearing Robert and Margaret's conversation, of the embezzlement, of Margaret's threat. Her voice was calm, free of bitterness, laden only with a deep sadness. As Sarah spoke, James watched his parents' reactions closely. Robert seemed to shrink in his chair, guilt weighing on his shoulders. Margaret, on the other hand, maintained a facade of composure, though her eyes betrayed her growing panic. When Sarah finished, the silence that followed was heavy with decades of secrets and lies. James finally broke the silence. "Is it true?" he asked, looking directly at his parents. "Did you embezzle millions from the company? Did you threaten Sarah to keep her quiet? Robert was the first to speak, his voice cracking. James, son, I'm sorry. It's true. It started with small diversions, but soon, it got out of control. Margaret tried to intervene quickly. Robert, no, we can't. Enough, Margaret, Robert exclaimed, tears filling his eyes. Enough lies. Our son deserves the truth. Sarah deserves the truth. James felt a mixture of anger and pain at hearing his father's confession. Why? He asked, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. Why would you do that? Robert shook his head, shame evident on his face. At first, it was to maintain the lifestyle we were used to. Then it became an addiction. The power, the money, it was intoxicating. Margaret, seeing denial was futile, let her mask of composure fall at last. James, you have to understand. We did it for you too, to ensure your future, your position in society. James felt a surge of nausea at his mother's words. Don't you dare use my name to justify your crimes, he said, his voice trembling with controlled fury. You ruined Sarah's life. She lost everything because of your greed and threats. Sarah, who had been silent, finally spoke. Margaret, Robert, I bear no grudge against you. But what you did didn't just harm me. Think of all the lives affected by your actions. Robert lowered his head, tears falling freely. Sarah, I'm so sorry. So sorry. If we could go back. Margaret, seeing there was no escape, finally broke. I'm sorry too, Sarah. I was cruel to you. I was so afraid of losing everything. But that doesn't justify what I did. James watched the scene, feeling an onslaught of emotions, anger, sadness, disappointment, but above all, an unyielding resolve to set things right. What happened here today, he began, his voice firm, goes beyond our family. As president, I must ensure justice is served. A full investigation will be carried out. All the diverted funds will be traced and returned. Robert and Margaret nodded, defeated. They knew they could not escape the consequences of their actions. But before all that, James continued, there's something you both need to do. He turned to Sarah. Sarah sacrificed everything to protect this family, to protect me. She deserves more than just words. Robert was the first to move. He stood, stumbling towards Sarah, and fell to his knees before her. Sarah, he sobbed, please forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but please. Margaret, after a moment's hesitation, followed suit. Sarah, she said, her voice trembling, what we did to you was unforgivable. But I beg your forgiveness. We've lived with this guilt for decades. Sarah looked at the two of them, tears in her own eyes. For a long moment, she remained silent. Then, slowly, she reached out her hands, touching Robert and Margaret's shoulders. I forgive you, she said softly, not for your sake, but for mine. I've carried this weight for so long, it's time to let it go. James looked on, feeling a mixture of admiration and love for Sarah. Even after everything she had endured, she still found it in her heart to forgive. Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you're the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever known. Sarah smiled sadly. Life is too short to carry grudges, Jimmy. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting what was done. It means choosing peace over bitterness. Robert and Margaret rose, their faces stained with tears and remorse. James looked at his parents, a new resolve in his eyes. What happens from here won't be easy. There will be legal, financial, and public consequences. But we'll do this the right way, with honesty and integrity. He turned to Sarah. And you, Sarah, will never have to worry about anything again. I'll make sure you and the girls have everything you need. It's the least I can do after all you sacrificed. Sarah smiled, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, Jimmy. But all I ever really wanted was to see you become the man I always knew you would be. Just compassionate and brave. As the meeting ended, James knew this was only the beginning. There would be many challenges ahead, investigations, possible trials, public scrutiny. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a clarity of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, but guided by Sarah's example and his determination to correct past wrongs, James was ready to face it. This was not just a story of family redemption, but the start of a journey to bring more integrity and justice to the entire nation. As his parents left the office, discreetly escorted by security agents, James turned to Sarah. "Are you ready to begin this new chapter?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, a serene smile on her face. "I am, Jimmy. Together, we can make a difference." And so, in that Oval Office, a new era began. An era of truth, reconciliation, and above all, hope for a better future. The Oval Office was quiet, except for the soft tapping of keys as James worked on his computer. It was late at night, but the President of the United States couldn't rest, not after all he had discovered in recent days. James sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Since the shocking revelation about his parents' crimes and Sarah's past, he had thrown himself into a process of investigation and restitution. His trusted team, led by Elizabeth, his loyal secretary, was working tirelessly to uncover the truth. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Elizabeth entered, carrying a thick folder. Her normally composed face showed signs of worry. "Mr. President, we have the preliminary results of the internal investigation into the campaign finances." James felt his stomach drop. He knew what he was about to hear wouldn't be good. "Let's hear it, Elizabeth." She sat down across from him, opening the folder. "Sir, our team has discovered several wire transfers from offshore accounts into the campaign's funds. These accounts, they're directly linked to the embezzlements carried out by your father, Robert Anderson." James closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of this revelation. When he opened them again, his expression was resolute. "How much?" "About 30% of the campaign funds, sir," Elizabeth responded, her voice low. The silence that followed was deafening. James stood, walking over to the window. Outside, Washington slept, oblivious to the political earthquake about to unfold. "Elizabeth," he finally said, turning around, "I need you to call an emergency meeting with my communications team and legal advisors. Immediately." Elizabeth nodded, already rising. "What will be the agenda, sir?" James took a deep breath. "I'm going to make a public statement. The American people deserve to know the truth." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Mr. President, the implications of this—" "I know," James gently interrupted her, "but I will not continue this term based on a lie. It's time to clean house, Elizabeth. Starting with myself." She nodded, recognizing the gravity and bravery of his decision. "Understood, sir. I'll call the team immediately." After Elizabeth left to carry out his orders, James turned back to the window. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, Emma, and Olivia. They had sacrificed so much, lived with so little, while he enjoyed the fruits of a corruption he hadn't even known existed. The next few hours were a whirlwind of intense meetings, heated discussions, and meticulous planning. Legal advisors warned about the possible legal repercussions. Political strategists argued about the impact on public opinion. But James remained unwavering. When the sun began to rise over Washington's horizon, the speech was ready. James insisted on writing most of it himself. These would be his words, his confession, his promise to the American people. Before preparing to face the cameras, James made a phone call. "Sarah," he said when she picked up, "I'm about to do something important. Something that could change everything." Sarah's voice was calm on the other end. "You're going to tell the people the truth, aren't you?" James smiled sadly. Sarah had always known him better than anyone. "Yes, I can't go on with this farce. The people deserve to know." "I'm proud of you, Jimmy," Sarah said softly. "You're doing the right thing, no matter the cost." Those words, coming from the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, gave James the final strength he needed. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." Minutes later, James stood before the cameras in the Oval Office. The whole world watched as the President of the United States prepared to make an unprecedented announcement. "My fellow Americans," James began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him, "I come before you today not just as your president, but as a man who believes that truth, however painful, is vital to the health of our democracy." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Recently, I discovered that a significant portion of the funds used in my presidential campaign originated from illicit activities, money embezzled by my own father over the years, without my knowledge until a few days ago. An audible murmur came from the staff in the room. James continued, relentless. I understand this revelation raises serious questions about the legitimacy of my presidency. I want to assure all of you that a full, independent investigation will be conducted. Every cent will be traced, every person involved held accountable, including members of my own family. James took a deep breath before going on. I also want to share a story of courage and integrity that inspired me to make this difficult decision. He then told the story of Sarah, without naming names, detailing her sacrifice, her struggle, and her incredible strength of character. As he spoke, James noticed tears in the eyes of several members of his team. This extraordinary woman, he concluded, taught me that true strength lies not in hiding our mistakes, but in facing them head-on. It is with that spirit that I come before you today. James straightened his shoulders, his expression serious but determined. In the coming weeks, I will work tirelessly with Congress and the appropriate authorities to determine the best course of action. If it is determined that my presidency has been irreparably compromised by these illicit funds, I will be prepared to step down. A stunned silence fell over the room. James continued, but as long as I occupy this office, I will dedicate every moment to correcting this wrong, implementing reforms to prevent it from happening again, and restoring the trust you have placed in me. He paused one last time, his eyes shining with contained emotion. I ask for the American people's understanding and support during this difficult period. Together, we can turn this moment of crisis into an opportunity to strengthen our democracy and reaffirm our fundamental values of honesty and integrity. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you. The cameras clicked off, and for a moment, silence reigned in the Oval Office. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with Elizabeth and spread throughout the room. James's team, despite their shock and concern, recognized the monumental courage of his action. James knew the days ahead would be turbulent, investigations, possibly impeachment proceedings, and certainly relentless scrutiny from the media and the public. But for the first time in days, he felt at peace. As he left the Oval Office, his thoughts turned to Sarah, Emma, and Olivia. No matter what happened to his presidency, he had fulfilled the promise he made to himself. He had honored the example of integrity Sarah had given him. The future was uncertain, but James Anderson was ready to face it. With truth as his compass and courage as his strength, he was prepared for whatever storm lay ahead. And maybe, just maybe, out of this crisis, a stronger and more just nation could emerge. The Oval Office was quiet, except for the gentle tapping of keys as James worked on his computer. It was late at night, but the President of the United States still couldn't rest, not after everything he had discovered in recent days. James sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Since the shocking revelations about his parents' crimes and Sarah's past, he had plunged headlong into a process of investigation and reparation. His trusted team, led by Elizabeth, his loyal secretary, was working tirelessly to unearth the truth. A soft knock on the door broke his train of thought. "Come in," he said. Elizabeth entered, carrying a thick folder. Her usually composed face showed signs of worry. "Mr. President Mars, we have the preliminary results of the internal investigation into the campaign finances." James felt his stomach tighten. He knew what he was about to hear wouldn't be good. "Go ahead, Elizabeth." She sat in front of the desk, opening the folder. "Sir, our team has uncovered several transfers of funds from offshore accounts into the campaign's accounts. These accounts, they're directly connected to the embezzlement carried out by your father, Robert Anderson." James closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of this revelation. When he opened them, his expression was resolute. "How much?" "Approximately 30% of the campaign funds, sir," Elizabeth answered, her voice low. The silence that followed was deafening. James got up, walking to the window. Outside, Washington slept, unaware of the political quake about to occur. "Elizabeth," he finally said, turning back, "I need you to call an emergency meeting with my communications team and legal advisors immediately." Elizabeth nodded, already standing. "What should be on the agenda, sir?" James took a deep breath. "I'm going to make a public announcement. The American people deserve to know the truth." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Mr. President, the implications—" "I know," James interrupted her gently, "but I can't and won't keep up this charade. It's time to clean up, Elizabeth, starting with me." The hours that followed passed in a flurry of intense meetings, heated debates, and meticulous planning. Legal advisors warned him of potential legal consequences. Political strategists argued about the impact on public opinion. But James remained firm. When the sun began to rise above the Washington skyline, the speech was ready. James had insisted on writing most of it himself. These would be his words, his confession, his promise to the American people. Before facing the cameras, James made a call to Sarah. Her calm, comforting voice gave James the final push he needed. Minutes later, James stood before the cameras in the Oval Office. The entire world watched as the President of the United States prepared to make an unprecedented announcement. "My fellow Americans," James began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him, "I come to you today not just as your president, but as a man who believes that truth, however painful, is essential to the health of our democracy." He paused, looking directly at the camera. "Recently, I discovered that a significant portion of the funds used in my presidential campaign came from illicit activities. Funds embezzled by my own father over the years, which I knew nothing about until just a few days ago." An audible murmur rose from the team in the room. James pressed on, unflinching. "I understand that this revelation raises serious questions about the legitimacy of my presidency. I want to assure you that a complete and independent investigation will be conducted. Every cent will be traced, every person involved held accountable, including members of my own family." James drew a deep breath before continuing. "Though I had no knowledge of where these funds came from at the time of the campaign, I recognize that, as a candidate and now as president, the ultimate responsibility lies with me. I fully accept this responsibility and am prepared to face any consequences that may arise." He then detailed the steps that would be taken. An independent commission would be formed to investigate not only the campaign finances, but every aspect of his administration. James promised full transparency and cooperation with all investigations. "I also want to share with you a story of courage and integrity that inspired me to take this difficult step," James continued. He recounted Sarah's story without naming her, detailing her sacrifice, her struggles, and her remarkable character. James squared his shoulders, his expression somber but resolute. "In the coming weeks, I will work tirelessly with Congress and the competent authorities to determine the best course of action. If it's determined that my presidency has been irreparably compromised by these illegal funds, I will be ready to accept the consequences, including the possibility of stepping down." He finished his speech by asking for the American people's understanding and support during this difficult time, emphasizing his commitment to truth and integrity. In the days that followed, the nation was thrown into turmoil. Headlines screamed about the scandal, political analysts debated non-stop, and Congress moved quickly into action. James kept his word, cooperating fully with all investigations, supplying documents, testifying when summoned, and urging everyone in his administration to do the same. He refused to invoke any executive privilege, insisting that the complete truth had to come out, no matter the personal or political cost. The investigation revealed the extent of Robert Anderson's crimes. Millions of dollars had been siphoned off over decades, not just from the family business, but from government funds through fraudulent contracts. The web of corruption reached far beyond what James had ever imagined. While the political storm raged, James found strength and solace in his newly reunited family. Sarah, now fully recovered, had moved into the White House with Emma and Olivia. The twins, with their innocence and joy, brought light even to the darkest days. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of congressional hearings, James found Sarah sitting on a private balcony, gazing at the stars. "How are you, Jimmy?" she asked softly as he joined her. James sighed, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Tired, Sarah, but at peace in a way. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I should." Sarah smiled, taking his hand. "You are, my dear. I'm so proud of the man you've become." The next day, as James had anticipated, impeachment proceedings officially began. The nation watched, divided as the drama unfolded. Some demanded his immediate resignation, while others admired his honesty and courage in facing the scandal head-on. James refused to resign, insisting he would accept the verdict of the constitutional process. He continued to govern, focusing especially on anti-corruption measures and campaign finance reform. Amid the political chaos, Sarah's story became public. Investigative journalists traced her journey from the night she left the Anderson mansion to her years on the street with Emma and Olivia. The narrative captured the public's imagination, humanizing the scandal and providing a powerful counterpoint to the corruption that had been exposed. One afternoon, while he was playing with Emma and Olivia in the White House garden, James was called back to his office. Elizabeth awaited him there, her expression grave. "Mr. President," she said, "the final impeachment vote is scheduled for tomorrow." James nodded, feeling the weight of that moment. "Understood. Thank you, Elizabeth, for everything." That night, James gathered Sarah and the girls, gently explaining the situation. Olivia's simple words, "No matter what happens, you'll always be our hero," moved James deeply. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, looking each of them in the eye, "we'll face it together, as a family." The next morning, James dressed carefully, preparing for what might be his last day as President of the United States. Before leaving, he kissed Sarah and the girls, carrying their love and strength with him. As he walked the corridors of the White House, possibly for the last time as its occupant, James reflected on the incredible journey that had led him there. A lost wallet, an unexpected reunion, hidden secrets. Everything had converged to this moment. Regardless of the impeachment's outcome, James knew he had done the right thing. He had honored the lessons of integrity Sarah had taught him years ago. He had placed truth and the nation's well-being above his own interests. And so, with his head held high and his conscience at peace, James Anderson walked toward his destiny, ready to face the consequences of his actions and those of his family. Whatever the verdict, he knew he was not alone. He had his family's love, the respect of those who valued honesty, and the clear conscience of a man who had chosen to do the right thing, no matter the cost. The future was uncertain, but James was prepared to face it. With truth as his guide and courage as his strength, he was ready for any storm that might come. And maybe, just maybe, out of this crisis a stronger, more just and more honest nation could emerge. The months following James Anderson's bombshell announcement were a whirlwind of activity in Washington. The nation's capital, used to scandals and political plot twists, had never witnessed anything like the daily drama unfolding. The government investigation, led by a team of special prosecutors appointed by Congress, moved at full throttle. Every aspect of James's campaign, as well as his family's financial activities over the past decades, came under meticulous scrutiny. True to his word, James cooperated fully with the investigation. He spent hours giving testimony, provided every document requested, and urged everyone in his administration to do the same. His transparency and willingness to face the consequences head-on impressed even his staunchest critics. Meanwhile, Robert Anderson faced a slew of criminal charges. The financial empire he had built over decades collapsed, revealing a complex network of fraud, embezzlement, and corruption. The man who had once been a business titan now faced the prospect of spending his remaining years behind bars. Amid all the chaos and uncertainty, James discovered renewed purpose in his social program. The initiative, originally inspired by his reunion with Sarah and the twins, had taken on greater urgency and relevance. "This program isn't just about helping those in need," James explained in a passionate address to Congress. "It's about correcting the systemic injustices that allow people like Sarah to slip through the cracks of our society." It's about building a country where integrity and compassion matter more than wealth and power. Surprisingly, the program began to gain bipartisan support. Many politicians, aware of the public's anger over the recently exposed corruption, saw it as an opportunity for redemption and reform. In the midst of the political turbulence, Emma and Olivia started a new chapter in their lives. Now living in the White House with James and Sarah, the twins were enrolled in a local school. Their first day of classes was a mix of excitement and nervousness, but they faced it with the same courage they had shown throughout their entire journey. As the investigations continued, it became clear that although James had had no direct knowledge of the illicit campaign funds, his position as president was irreparably compromised. With dignity and acceptance, James announced his decision to leave the presidency. "Serving this great country has been the honor of my life," he declared in his farewell speech. "But the integrity of our democratic system must stand above any individual. I leave with a clear conscience, knowing I did what was right, not what was easy." As part of a deal negotiated with the prosecutors, a substantial settlement was arranged for Sarah and the twins, recognizing the years of injustice and hardship they had endured. With those funds, the family was able to buy a comfortable house in the suburbs of Washington, a home symbolizing a fresh start for them all. Sarah, fully recovered from her illness, devoted herself to caring for Emma and Olivia. Mornings were filled with breakfast prep, packing school bags, and cheerful walks to the bus stop. Afternoons were for homework, playing in the yard and storytelling at twilight. Freed from presidential responsibilities, James found new purpose in life. He threw himself into social projects, using his experience and influence to promote positive change in society. Often, he took Emma and Olivia to visit shelters and community centers, teaching them about the value of service and compassion. "Remember, girls," he often said, "a person's real worth isn't in what they own, but in the good they do for others." The twins flourished at their new school. Emma, with her outgoing personality, quickly made friends and excelled in extracurricular activities. Olivia, more reserved, discovered a passion for reading and the arts, her colorful drawings soon adorning the walls of their home. Sundays became family lunch days in the backyard. Sarah, smiling as she watched James play with the girls, often reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to that moment. From a makeshift shelter under a store awning to this home filled with love and laughter, it was a transformation she hardly dared believe. One sunny afternoon, as they watched Emma and Olivia racing across the lawn, James turned to Sarah. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if those two little heroines hadn't found my wallet that day." Sarah smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Their honesty changed everything, didn't it?" James nodded pensively. "Not just for us, but for so many others. The social program we started is helping thousands of families. The campaign finance reforms are making our democracy more transparent, and it all began because two little girls decided to do the right thing." "They're special," Sarah agreed, her heart overflowing with pride. "Just like you," James added, taking Sarah's hand. "You raised them to be that way, even under the hardest circumstances. And you never lost your integrity, even when the world seemed stacked against you." Sarah squeezed James's hand, feeling a surge of gratitude for all they had overcome together. "We're a family now," she said softly. "A family built on honesty, courage, and love." As the sun began to set, bathing the yard in golden tones, James and Sarah called the girls inside. The house soon filled with the sounds of laughter and lively conversation, the aroma of dinner cooking, and a palpable sense of love and belonging. That night, as James tucked Emma and Olivia into bed, he gazed at their smiling faces and felt a wave of emotion wash over him. These little girls, with their unwavering honesty, hadn't just changed his life. They had started a ripple of change extending far beyond their family. "Good night, my little heroines," he whispered, kissing their foreheads. As he closed the bedroom door, James reflected on the incredible journey they had all taken. From a lost wallet to a transformed nation, it was a story of redemption, second chances, and above all, the transformative power of honesty and love. And so, In that cozy home on the outskirts of Washington, a family once separated by circumstance and secrecy not only found reunion, but also discovered a new purpose. Together, they would face the future, not as victims of the past, but as architects of a brighter and more just tomorrow.